The following podcast is non-profit and is based on the IGCSE history curriculum. This podcast is about how Germany emerged from the First World War. Firstly, I'm going to speak about the government and law in Germany. At that time, Germany was under the autocratic and authoritarian rule of the Kaiser. He was a strong and powerful ruler, which is why he was supported by many Germans. However, there was some opposition, as he limited many personal freedoms. As part of the government, there was also a German legislative assembly called the Reichstag. Although most decisions were made by either the Kaiser himself or officials he appointed, such as the Chancellor. He did, however, receive a lot of advice, which he did take from the generals of the army, as he was a strong supporter of theirs. Now, I'll talk about the German Revolution of 1918. The German Revolution of 1918 began in the port city of Kiel, where sailors who had been ordered to attack the British Navy in a last-ditch attempt to win the war committed mutiny, refusing to fight and starting the revolution. Many soldiers, families, and citizens joined the revolution, demanding for the Kaiser to abdicate and for the Social Democrats to govern Germany. In Berlin, citizens marched into the city centre, and Prince Max announced that the Kaiser would abdicate. The next day, he was driven to neutral Holland to live the rest of his life in exile. Meanwhile, the new Socialist Republic of Germany signed the armistice and agreed to the harsh terms to stop the war. And in this final section of the podcast, I'll be discussing the negative outcomes of the war on Germany. Some social outcomes were that there were severe shortages of food and fuel, which caused starvation and hypothermia, which finally resulted in the deaths of almost 300,000 people. Also, 1.5 million German soldiers who were demobilized were bitter and angry when they returned, as they believed their efforts had been pointless as they had lost the war. These soldiers may be considered somewhat lucky, though, as many had died in the war, leaving many families without husbands or fathers. To support these families, the government had to spend about 1/3 of the country's money on providing war pensions for the families. There were also many negative economic outcomes of the war. For starters, the average worker's income in Germany had decreased to around 1/3 of what it had been before the war, while industrial production had fallen to about 2/3 of its capacity before the war. This meant that steel was in short supply, and factories which manufactured goods were closing down. Furthermore, there were now huge gaps between the living standards of the rich and the poor. Finally, there were also many negative political factors which resulted from the war. Many Germans had become scared because the chaos of the end of the war was causing a breakdown and lack of law and order in their country. Additionally, many ex-soldiers and civilians with right-wing, such as nationalist views, despised the new government of democracy and believed that their political representatives had betrayed the country by signing the armistice. Furthermore, the abdication of the Kaiser had caused many right and left-wing groups to fight over ruling the country, which was one of the factors which disrupted the law and order in Germany. This is the end of the podcast. Thank you for listening.